Oh man, Piccolo, where did you get those clothes?
Your wife got them for me out of your closet.
Thank you for watching this specific video, because let's just be honest, Piccolo is not as popular as the other characters throughout Dragon Ball, and it's also great to see black characters like Piccolo getting some love. So the first thing that we gotta talk about is going back to Dragon Ball itself. Now, looking at it like that, if you start off with Dragon Ball Z and at the very beginning of the show, Piccolo's basically becoming a good guy to team up with Goku to defeat Raditz, you never really have that perspective of him as a bad guy until you go back and look at Dragon Ball and look at King Piccolo and see how all of that led to where it is. So that whole aspect of Piccolo being a villain was never really felt until later on, and when I went back and rewatched Piccolo as a villain, he wasn't as good of a villain as King Piccolo was for very obvious reasons, because he was not as cruel as his father and didn't have the ambitions that his father did, because he was essentially just created for revenge but didn't have those worldly ambitions the way that his father had. Piccolo being a villain was never really that good, because King Piccolo really set the bar so high. But then when you look at what he is in Dragon Ball Z, it's just truly brilliant to see what an awesome transition, even though he wasn't a villain like other Dragon Ball villains were. Seeing the relationship between Piccolo and Gohan develop is truly amazing, you know, and a lot of people have, especially black people, have often related Piccolo to being the stereotype of a very strict black father or a very strict uncle, or, you know, a paternal black parent who's very, very tough on their kid to get the best out of them. And obviously, Piccolo was tough on Gohan for survival, but when you study his character and you look at him specifically, it's truly amazing to see how Piccolo softened up because of Gohan, and also how Gohan benefited from Piccolo. It's like you have this beautiful yin and yang relationship where Piccolo became a better person due to Gohan's positive influence, and Gohan became mentally tougher and stronger because of Piccolo's influence. You know, when you look at that transition and when you see what he was later on, where he actually sacrificed his life for Gohan and then went on planet Namek and then eventually fought against Frieza, and at that point, I mean, he basically did everything to try and protect Goku from Frieza when he was powering up the Spirit Bomb. Seeing Piccolo going through all of those different moments was really one of the best things throughout Dragon Ball, and it really feels like Piccolo's arc as a character really almost came to a complete close around the Namek arc, because he finally got a chance to go back to his old home. You know, he met, you know, well, Nail was dying, but he fused with Nail. You know, he became a lot stronger. He was basically a super Namekian at that time relative to what he would be later on when he fused with Kami. And one of the amazing things about Piccolo specifically is that when you look at what he was during the Android arc, I really feel like that's where his complete arc came full circle, where he was willing to fuse with somebody that he didn't particularly have good interests with to have the better interests of mankind throughout Dragon Ball history. And I really think that that's one of the amazing things about Piccolo. And granted, it didn't work out because Cell was too strong, the androids, you know, were obviously a problem, but at least in that moment, it took a lot out of him to be what he was in Dragon Ball Z. And, you know, to go back to why I've always found Piccolo an interesting character, even though he wasn't my first original favorite character. It was first Gohan, and then eventually, I mean, Trunks was also like my favorite character at some point too. Those were my two favorites because they're like the hybrid Saiyans with all the potential and stuff. But the reason why Piccolo became my favorite character was really because I looked at the quote-unquote disadvantage that he had. I looked at his underdog mentality and the fact that the Saiyans just always had an advantage over him because of their Saiyan genetics. And I'm not trying to turn this into a much deeper conversation in the realm that you're probably thinking of trying to take the conversation with genetics and having a disadvantage in society, but you basically get where I'm coming from here. Piccolo was always a disadvantaged character compared to the accelerated growth of his Saiyan peers, but yet he somewhat kept up with them. Granted, he was never on their level, but he was always like one level below where the Saiyans were, which, you know, he was never as good as them. They could obviously all beat him, but the fact that he was fighting so hard to keep up really showed that Piccolo was trying to live up to his full potential. He was a character that was limited but made the best out of what he had. He didn't have all these transformations until Super, obviously. So, with that said, it's very admirable to see this character who knows he's weaker than others, doing everything he can, from trying to outsmart his opponent, you know, like he did against Cell, or in the anime version when, like, Gohan was having his beam clash against Cell, Piccolo jumped in, and granted, that wasn't in the manga variation, but it just goes to show that no matter how strong, Piccolo will always give his best. And when you go back to the moment where, like, Gohan was being squeezed to death by Cell, and Piccolo was the one who was actually talking to Goku and telling Goku more stuff about his own son than Goku even knew. And the fact that Piccolo was taking off his cape and, like, getting ready to go fight Cell, who is significantly stronger than him, really goes to show his level of altruism and how much he's willing to put other people above himself. Especially somebody who's not even his own technical kid, which is Gohan. Seeing that about him, it just made him such an honorable character to look at throughout the series. You know, while Dragon Ball Z had an amazing character arc for Piccolo, and I always say that Piccolo and Vegeta had a great character arc, it didn't go so great in Dragon Ball GT, because when you look at Dragon Ball GT, he was barely used, and then you had that random episode where, like, Gohan, possessed by Baby, blasted Piccolo with that whole random, like, X, like when he blasted Piccolo and it made, like, that huge X when Piccolo was picking up Goten. And the weird thing about that moment is that when you go back and you look at it, it's like he disappeared and Baby did all of this stuff on Earth and then went to the Tuffle planet while Piccolo was injured, you know, but it's like, but Piccolo can heal, so it wouldn't take him that long to come back, so he should have tried to do something against Baby. It was one of those things where, like, his character was just written out, and then they just forced a way for Piccolo to just basically die, you know, for, you know, the Dragon Balls to not cause a threat to Earth and all of that stuff, which I felt was an admirable thing. But it also felt like a forced way to get rid of his character, but, you know, he did try to help Goku, you know, get out of the home for infinite losers throughout Dragon Ball GT, so, you know, at least they found a way to kind of try to redeem him there, but he was horribly treated in GT. And then when we look at early Dragon Ball Super, my goodness, I mean, where do you even want to go here? You have the Battle of Gods, well, specifically if you want to go with the movie, where he lost to Beerus with the chopsticks, which many of you who have been following this channel for years know that I hate that meme. And then you have in Resurrection F, well, technically, he didn't die in the movie, but he did die in Dragon Ball Super, where, like, Frieza basically just killed him, and Goku's like, yeah, don't worry about it, we'll just wish him back later. It's just like his death felt so meaningless in that moment. And then you have the Universe 6 tournament when he lost to Frost. You know, which, if you guys remember my Super review, which I'm sure one of you is going to want to go back and watch that Super review when I was so upset to see how he just got destroyed by Frost like that after the whole needle stuff and, you know, all of that. And then when we go on to the Tournament of Power, he had some good moments, but then he was fighting against the bug and then that invisible bug, and it was just like, come on, is he really just going to get knocked out like that with his super hearing? And, you know, he's always a very on-guard character that uses his intelligence to survive. So to see Piccolo lose like that just felt so forced. And then we get the Moro arc where at least he was a key character that was trying to fight off some of the villains that came to Earth when he was fighting alongside Gohan. And then, you know, in Dragon Ball Super Broly, he did help Goku and Vegeta fuse, so I feel like that was a good direction of his character too. But when we compare this to other Dragon Ball movies up to this point, the problem with Piccolo has always been, he's always been like random cannon fodder, you know, to the other villains. I mean, with the exception of Lord Slug, there was really no real movie where Piccolo really felt like he had a huge impact on the plot. I mean, I guess you can kind of say Dead Zone, but basically in most of the movies, Piccolo's just either trying to save Gohan or just getting wrecked while the other characters are getting wrecked too, while he's just getting wrecked worse. But when we finally get to Dragon Ball Super Superhero, I gotta admit that I do like what they've done with him. I mean, yeah, it's like kind of like Piccolo's like the black uncle who babysits like Pan now, you know, which I think is cool how like he's training her and all that, even though Pan was originally supposed to be trained by Goku, but that's another conversation for another day. Piccolo has basically transformed into a family man, basically, to people who are of a different race than him, and he's also basically become a character that I think we could honestly say is a true teacher. He's a great teacher to have. I mean, even if you go back to the Buu Saga, he was the perfect character to teach Goten and Trunks to do the fusion dance. Granted, they were kids and they didn't maximize their potential, and if Piccolo had had their power, he probably would have beaten Buu. But, you know, ultimately, I feel like in the grand scheme of things, Piccolo has truly become full circle with getting a new transformation. Granted, he kind of had to cheat to get the form, but he's gotten stronger, he's had more relevance as of lately. He always helps characters in some sort of way, even if it's not directly by fighting. And ultimately, I think Piccolo is a much better character now than he has been in years past, where I think most of us who are Piccolo's fans would agree that his character has been completely dumpstered for years, and it truly feels like Piccolo fans are starting to see the light in a rather dark life.